Well, there's no evidence presented by the intelligence agencies that Russia was behind this, and that has not stopped, unfortunately, the mainstream media from reporting it as if it was absolute truth. They don't even call it alleged hacking for the most part. It's just become accepted that this is what's happened, and I believe it was done initially to try to get the electors to flip their votes to Trump. That didn't work. On Friday, the Congress meets to certify the election. The Senate and Representative can object to Trump. I think this was all about undermining either him being elected ultimately or his presidency. But we have here with the mainstream media, unfortunately, one of the four types of fake news. One is satire, which Onion is always very useful, gets closer to the truth usually than others. We have clickbait, where people, some guy in LA, in other words, Eastern Europe, have just did fake stories to get people to sell ads, to click on this thing. You have intelligence agencies apparently writing these stories of disinformation, where you have a lot of truth and then these blatant falsehoods. And with the mainstream media, you have omission. They leave out the other side of the story on international story. They have an agenda. And the agenda is not news. It is not presenting all sides of complex international stories, of competing interests of nations. They present the American point of view only, or the Western point of view, and they completely omit the Easterners, or they explain what Eastern people, Russians, Iranians, Syrians, think. And the American people never get to hear the voices of people in the East, and that dehumanizes them, making it easier, by the way, to go to war against them. So this is just another instance of corporate media, fake news, and in this case, of course, they're blaming, we're putting emphasis on Trump, but this is very dangerous for Russia as well, the U.S.-Russia relations.
It's dangerous for the whole world here. Don, if I can go to you, I mean, it's not just omission. Just look at the Washington Post. I mean, they're really batting 1,000 over there now. I mean, with 3 fake news stories come out recently, and, those people that write those stories, their careers soar because they get the clicks for it, and they're never sorry about it. They're never sorry for misleading and deceiving and playing very, very partisan politics here. And overall, it is about the delegitimization of Trump, but it is delegitimizing the entire American political system in the process. Go ahead, Don.
Well, first of all, just by its operation, it actually, in the minds of millions of people in the country, delegitimizes reality. This narrative is completely decoupled from any factual basis. Look at the discussion, for example, of these allegations against Russia. They've presented several reports now that supposedly prove it. Not a fact in the whole report. There's a chart that would embarrass Netanyahu with his Roadrunner bomb that he brought to the UN that supposedly shows the mechanical operation of a hack. And it looks like something that, Wile E. Coyote would buy from Acme to throw at Roadrunner. You have, meanwhile, the architecture of something quite ugly being constructed. And the NDAA, for example, is the most recent step that's been taken with the U.S. the government's been grappling with this question of quote-unquote foreign propaganda at the Broadcasters Board of Governors level. Now they have this thing that they call the Global Engagement Center, that's a child of the NDAA. Global Engagement Center sounds almost like mail-order brides, but in fact it's like a ministry of truth from George Orwell's time. And if you look at the actual mission statement that's specified in the statute, that's exactly what it is. They're looking at information that comes into the United States, deciding what's true and what's not, and then dealing with it, whether they deal with it in the American press, because those entities controlled by the BBG and by this new group are now allowed to propagandize the American people with their own tax dollars. And so they're going to interpret reality for us. And, the idea of people in Washington interpreting reality is too hilarious.
It's a sick joke in the new year. Scott, everything we've really said so far on this program is that the mainstream media has failed. And this is why they're taking these actions right now. They're terrified of alternative media. They're terrified of alternative voices because they have lost. People don't believe them anymore. And that's why they want to shut everybody else down. You have the administration going out supporting this. You have a politicized CIA and FBI which is really, that's terrible in itself here. We shouldn't have those kind of conditions existing in government. And then you have the Republican Party's, members of the Republican Party going against their own head of party, Donald Trump, president-elect. This is the gambit that we're in. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, this is exactly what's been happening in the political system, the media, and the United States government for quite some time. We've had a tremendous amount of propaganda, since the newspapers became an issue in the early 1800s. The Federalist papers, all the different newspapers were supporting their political agendas. These agendas have been going on, obviously since the early 1900s. If you want to get into the history of it, for God's sakes, I mean, Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, basically wrote the book on how to basically control societies with media. And the societies that are being controlled with media, there are underlying agendas. And these underlying agendas are absolutely have failed in this last election. And they were surprised by it. I was surprised by it as well. Yeah, it's good to see a failure in the system, and I'm really happy to see that it's being exposed by muckrakers like RT. A lot of the people in the United States say, "Oh, RT is scary. It's propaganda." There's a lot of individuals who actually believe, that this is a true propaganda outlet. When in fact, I try every day to try to get on American media and talk about these types of things and get these types of things exposed in American media. I mean, they've covered up Syria, they've covered up, they've covered up everything, in Ukraine. They're obviously covering up what happened in Libya. So this is a tremendous amount of propaganda that's being fed to the American people, and they actually believe it. And I don't think it's because, there are individuals out there that are trying to deceive. It's a confabulation that they actually believe. And when you hear a narrative that isn't consistent to what you've heard on television, unfortunately, it becomes uncomfortable, and most people will shut it out, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
That's just human nature. So that's what's happened here is we have a society that's been incredibly misguided, incredibly misinformed, and now, they've been exposed by, thankfully, RT, CCTV, Press TV, and individuals like Don and Joe and I that come out and say, hey, wait a second, might want to look over your shoulder. There are a lot of things that you've been misguided about, for well over 100 years in this country.
Joe, I put on Facebook last night a screenshot. I was watching Fox News, and it was that Fox News is the only one that actually says, where's the evidence, and I give them credit for that. But one of the comments below the screen as they were having the conversation about quote-unquote Russian hacking, they said Soviet interference. Now, I thought that just spoke volumes of where the media stands right now. The Soviet Union dissolved 25 years ago last month. It's gone. All right? But apparently in the minds of the mainstream media, it's still very there. This is really the problem as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Cold War never ended, basically, for those people, unfortunately. Scott mentions the history of journalism in the United States and muckraking, except for a period of that muckraking period of the progressive era in Lincoln Steffens and in the 1970s when we saw Washington Post, a very different newspaper then than it is today, helped bring down Nixon and the intelligence agencies, the dirty tricks that were exposed by Church Committee and other committees. For the most part, American journalism has been filled with careerists who live vicariously through the powerful people that they cover, and they ignore the greater power that the press has, which is to cut those powerful people down to size. And until you get the skepticism that we no longer have in the media, they're going to take whatever the CIA of all agencies tells them about Russian hacking and other matters. The CIA, which has lived since 1947 on deception and deceit and meddling in other elections and overthrowing elected governments, the people's attitude in the press and then unfortunately in the public is, well, you don't believe the CIA when they tell us this? I mean, it's extraordinary how far we've come from the 1970s. We've lost all skepticism in the media against what government officials say, and therefore we're in a lot of trouble, and these stories can be peddled and believed, unfortunately. The reporters themselves believe it through their own upbringing and their lack of skepticism.
Let me go to Don before we go to the break here. You know, we just heard about the CIA and overthrowing regimes around the world. You know, it's really interesting, that whole regime paradigm is come home to Washington, D.C. Now they want to overthrow a government in the United States. They have had plenty of practice all around the world, and now they've brought their quote-unquote skills to the American people. How democratic is that? Go ahead, Don.
First of all, I have to admire Trump, or whoever is the person behind Trump's campaign, Kellyanne Conway for sure.
Yep.
Managing just the precise navigation of that campaign to more than 300 electors in the Electoral College, which is the legal mechanism to be elected president. It was a razor-sharp navigation of a minefield that consisted of wall-to-wall media coverage, just basically a carpet bombing of his campaign, information-wise, from its inception, and all the way through every hurdle that was